It's a dismal and wintry morning on Friday, the 27th of January. So, what better than to welcome you to another short episode of Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions? Only yesterday, a dear friend of mine who read my latest tweets asked me, Harry, you post a lot of tweets covering a lot of topics, mostly in the Swana and Gulf regions, but also on Armenian and European and UK issues. But why is it that the number of tweets on Palestine always preponderates in your Twitter feed? And her question was very valid because it's true. And possibly one way of explaining it is that I'm still convinced, after many, many years of earning a few stripes, covering and analyzing and working with the Israel-Palestine conflict, that it still remains the hub of Arab consciousness. And I'm talking about ordinary Arabs, not their rulers, across the whole MENA and Gulf regions. So when people say that the Palestinian issue has faded, has waned, it probably has in the political minds of many of those rulers, but not in the minds and hearts of the Arab peoples and the Muslim peoples in general, I would add, across the whole region. But again, she's right. There are other conflicts. Look at Lebanon with the latest shenanigans between a judge and a prosecutor over the explosion at the port in Beirut. Neither one of them can actually sanction the other, and they're speaking across each other, but it is dragging Lebanon, if possible, into a deeper political mire. Look at Tunisia. I call this new constitution, pardon the expression, a political con, a way of getting the executive to overwhelm the judiciary and the legislature and therefore hinder or overcome the clear separation of powers. Look at Yemen. Despite the truce that is still holding, the country is damaged, is destroyed. Look at Iraq, caught between a rock and a hard place, between the US and Iran, and trying desperately to build bridges with other countries, including in the Arab world, in order to be able to emerge out of this morass. Look at the Western Sahara conflict, the tensions between Morocco and Algeria. Look at Syria, the narco state of the Swana region that produces so many amphetamines, captagons, and sends them to Saudi Arabia via Jordan and other routes. There are many more examples. I won't bother you with them. So why today, again, on this dismal wintry day, on Palestine? Well, what got me roiled and annoyed was an interview with Mark Regev. Now, Mark Regev was senior advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu many years ago, and then later became ambassador of Israel to the UK. And if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, he's now the chair of the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy and Foreign Relations at Reichman University. He was on BBC Two Newsnight, and the conversation, the interview that took place, the lax, weak sense of accountability, I felt, stiffened actually my resolve again. And I wished that somebody like Emily Maitlis, Jeremy Paxman in his Rottweiler years, or even the ever diplomatic Mark Urban were sitting in the chair opposite Regev, who was producing his smooth and glib answers, treating Israel, the government, the policies, with kids' gloves, and constantly being afraid of the label of anti-Semitism if we ever go close enough to criticize Israel. And the media in this country, including the Christian media, will automatically be accused or are afraid of anti-Semitism. Whereas, in my opinion, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and criticism of Israeli governments on policies aren't the same thing. So perhaps we can use a German expression and to say that we have to cross over our shadows, jump over our shadows, and be a bit more realistic about what we're talking about rather than being completely daunted by this labor, so that anything we utter is automatically bounced back at us as anti-Semitism. The rabbis of Naturai Karta, not the most popular rabbis for the Israeli government, recently in the news, though, were pictured holding a Palestinian flag. They can tell you a thing or two about Zionism and Semitism. And if you wish to learn more, there is so much that's being said and written about Palestine and the conflict. In fact, in a few days' time, the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, what is known in Arabic as El Markaz, is hosting a colloquium in Doha, in Qatar, with a few truly impressive speakers. It's at the Sheraton Hotel in Doha, and the topic will be Palestine from yesteryears to contemporary times. So there is a lot that is being said in academia, with NGOs, with individuals, observers, even with some journalists who have integrity and are not fearsome. But then you face the latest blast, Jenin, in the north of the West Bank. 9 dead, 7 of them Palestinian fighters and 2 civilians. And of course, the narrative turned not into why this fight was taking place in Jenin, although some people did analyze it, took it back to the Second Intifada of 2002 and showed how the scars of the war then have still affected what is happening today. But the majority of the narrative that Israel tried to export was that here we are, a bastion of freedom and democracy, fighting terrorists. So let us examine the fact of these fighters from Nablus, these battalions, small battalions from Nablus, from Jenin, and from elsewhere. They're being targeted, they're being found out, they're being discovered where they're hiding, whether it's because there are snitches, whether it's because of the spyware app or what, I don't know. That's way above my pay grade. But when we talk about the Palestinian struggle, it's not a struggle because it's an anti-Jewish struggle. It's not even anymore an anti-Israel struggle. Most Palestinians have recognized that Israel has the right to exist in security. But what they haven't recognized and cannot really recognize is that Palestine is still under occupation since 1967. Forget 1948. Some Palestinians and some Arabs will not be happy with me to say that. But let's put 48 to one side, the creation of the State of Israel, the Nakba, the deportation of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Forget that for the moment. Let's start with the Six-Day June War of 1967, an occupation that has lasted almost 60 years, and one that has produced what? Impunity, house demolitions galore, depopulations galore. Look at Sheikh Jarrah, look at Masafer Yatta, look at Khan Ahmar, look at elsewhere. Settlements, the whole occupied territory, which under international law cannot be touched until there is a resolution, is being peppered with settlements. And not only settlements, big or small, but also outposts that suddenly 7 or 8 people go stick a flag of the state of Israel and say, this is our land, and the government and the army come and protect them from any of the Palestinian owners of this land coming to reclaim their land or defend their groves and orchards. Apartheid? Yes. In the words of Human Rights Watch, of Amnesty International, of B'Tselem, apartheid is a word that bristles some people, but it is apartheid. And it's not even a la South Africa. In my opinion, it's worse. The confiscation of IDs. You're born in Jerusalem, but you're only a resident in Jerusalem. Then, if you go out because you want to pursue your academic studies, because you're posted abroad somewhere in a company or a mission or something, or because you are in love or married to somebody from outside, all this negates your rights to live, to have residency in the country you were born in. Whereas anybody with any traces of Jewish blood in them, from anywhere in the world, can make aliyah and come back to Israel, and automatically the machinery goes into a whirring move. And what happens? IDs, subsidies, etc., etc., etc. Come on. And then you talk about democracy in Israel. It is not an Israeli democracy. Until recently, I would have agreed with you that it is a Jews-only democracy. But this has also changed with this new radical government that Mark Regev, in his interview with BBC Two Newsnight, was trying to make an argument that, come on, it's not the worst, most radical right-wing fringe government with 3 or 4 ministers there that would make my short hair stand up. No, this is a benevolent, nice government that wants the best for Israel and Israeli citizens, as well as for Palestinians within the Green Line and under occupation. All it does is basically quashing them, trying to weaken the High Court or the Supreme Court, trying to have the executive overrule the judiciary. What was I saying about Tunisia 2 minutes ago? We talk about Tunisia, we write about Tunisia, we criticize Tunisia. When it comes to Israel, and we see the same things magnified and amplified, we, me, you, the press, the church press, the religious press, the pundits, we draw back, we balk. We say, no, we can't really criticize them because tomorrow they'll accuse us of anti-Semitism, and then we will be ostracized, we will be excommunicated, we will lose all our contacts. No, until recently, I would have agreed with you that it is a Jews-only democracy. But this has changed, this has altered dramatically with the recrowning of Netanyahu, and it is fast becoming a Zionist theocracy. Even if in my head, and from the little I understand of this conflict, Zionism and theocracy constitute an oxymoron. So, we then turn around and say, yes, but listen, we have to keep a balance. Things are not good. They're doing lots of things that they shouldn't be doing. Netanyahu is weak. He's desperately trying to to sit on his chair because he wants to protect himself, because he loves power, because. But let's balance it. The Palestinians are also weak. Yes, that is true. The Palestinians are weak. They're divided. But does that mean that the Palestinian people do not have the right on their side? Yes. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas fight like two cockerels. They rotate, they move around each other most of the time, and sometimes they peck each other and feathers fly. But it's not only a question of what are the Palestinians doing with their divisions. It's not only the geriatrics who are ruling in Ramallah or the fanatics who are ruling in Gaza. No, it's more than that. It's a right, an inherent right, an occupation of a land, of territories that should be restored, returned to its original owners. Not the owners of the biblical Old Testament of 3,000 years ago, but the owners until 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, when the country was called Palestine, when passports were Palestinian, when the currency was Palestinian. Otherwise, if we're going to go back 3,000 years, BC, that's politically incorrect, that's before Christ. If we want to go back then, well, look at the world. There are huge numbers of countries where the same applies, where conquerors have taken over. Palestinians, to their credit, have fought against this occupation and have kept their conflict in the media headlines, even though it wanes every now and then when there is a war here or a battle there. Even Aaron Miller, the everlasting optimist, who is always coming up with stories and with quotations from his previous experience with the presidents and US administrations. A couple of days ago, he was also saying that he's depressed with the Israeli situation. So if Secretary of State Antony Blinken wants to achieve anything when he comes and visits Israel and the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, if he wants to achieve anything other than a couple of photo opportunities and reminding us all of the unbreakable bonds between Israel and the United States, then he has to thump, Khrushchev-like, his hand on the table, confront Netanyahu, even if he and his boss, the President Biden, are afraid of repeating the episode with Obama, where basically Obama tried rather timorously to take a stand against Netanyahu. And what did Netanyahu do? He marginalized him, went to Washington, D.C., gave his speech, didn't even acknowledge the presence of the president down the road at the White House. Guess what? I'm slowly discarding my label, my sobriquet, as a pessoptimist, a la Emil Habibi, that famous Palestinian communist novelist, because I'm being overwhelmed by the crass injustice of this unequal, asymmetrical conflict that reminds me, funnily enough, and I'm going to surprise you here with an image, by Dulhath. Who is Dulhath in mythology? An evil outsider in the form of a creature riding an ostrich. This image is meant to represent the forces of deception, of corruption, of destruction, of subjugation. And guess why Dulhat comes to my mind now, on the 27th of January 2023? Because an Armenian Cypriot friend of mine reminded me of this myth, of this div, when she shared with me one of her drawings, not on Israel-Palestine, but on what is happening with the blockade of the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh and the protests there against Azerbaijani so-called eco-warriors. So, to continue with another image, like Sisyphus and his boulder, I say, forget it. That boulder is continually going to fall down. If the Israeli policies persist, however, the situation cannot be contained forever. We had Intifada number 1, we had Intifada number 2, we will have Intifada number 3. And then it will not only be within that small parcel of land called Israel and Palestine, but it will leak out and impact many other Arab countries, starting with Jordan, but then also other adjoining countries, including the so-called Abraham Accords partners of Israel. So, the Western world, and I place myself in this geographical location that is fixated with the Russo-Ukrainian war, if this Western world does not want to be caught with its political pants down and then scramble like crazy to contain the situation, a situation which incidentally our politicians helped create, do something. Do something before it's too late. I'm growing older. I feel it in my own body and in my own head. But I also know about it numerically. And I know, I told this to James Abbott the other day in our flagship Middle East analysis program, that I don't think I will see the day when Palestine will be a sovereign state contiguous to a secure Israel. But I am one little dot. If the West, the defender of democracy for Ukraine, wants also to defend democracies elsewhere, act. Act before you have another blaze, another conflagration, another scuffle, if you want to minimize its impact, in the Swana or MENA region. I leave you with that thought. And I pray, I do pray, that you, all of you, from media to politicians, to pundits, to observers, to speakers, to thinkers, to intellectuals, will realize, will fathom this reality. Injustice cannot last. Ask Aristotle. Take care.